Very ominous music.
Yeah.
I want a copy.
Well, they're here. You can get them at Amazon, at any good bookstore you can order from.
And a few
them.
lousy
I have a few here. Okay, so how did I start? This book here was published in the 18th century, and it is a collection of papers by two Elizabethan brothers, Anthony and Sir Francis Bacon. Now, Sir Francis we remember as a great philosopher and a lawyer, but the Bacon brothers ran spies, and they ran spies very well for a long time. And one of these spies was in trouble, and he'd been blown, and for some reason his letters upset me. So what he was doing, I'm reading this thing, you know, in bed. So I was reading this thing, and he was writing this plaintive letter from jail in France. He'd been overseas from England for many years, and he was begging the Bacons to go to Queen Elizabeth I and get her to tell the French king of the time, who was her ally, they were both fighting Spain, that the spy was her man and not Spain's, because the French had charged him with spying against France for Spain. But there was a little problem with that, which is that he was spying for both. So, you know, I asked myself, why do I care that this guy, Anthony Standen, has been blown? I mean, I'm a secular Jew, it has nothing to do with me. But then as I started to think about his situation, he was a genuine Catholic. He'd left because of religion in the 1560s, and he spied for European Catholic monarchs against European Protestants. He had a few lines he wouldn't cross. He didn't go directly against his own home country. But something happened in the 1580s, and he became one of the most effective spies abroad that Elizabeth had while still on Spain's payroll. So I thought, yeah, well, what was that like? And I just thought about his, you know, about his split core. And I was thinking, well, you know, a lot of us have conflicts, you know, in our lives. For instance, you go to Gap and you buy a sweater, and maybe you're vaguely aware that at the other end of the sweater there's a Bangladeshi girl who died in a sweatshop fire. But you wear the sweater. A tobacco executive puts his kids through college with the profits of cigarettes that he knows are poison. Now, most of us go through life and, you know, we do good things and we can compartmentalize. This guy couldn't. I mean, what could be more profound than, I believe in transubstantiation as a total Catholic, I believe in a physical hell, and I'm going to risk my life protecting my heretical birth country. So that's what he did. So I decided that I sort of wanted to try and wander in this world of his. Now, he himself was sort of unknowable. So I created a fictional character named Edward Latham, and he is the main character in the book. And his missions take him to the Brussels bed of the greatest woman singer of the day, who was an empress concubine. He's in Constantinople for the fearsome comet of 1578, which you saw in the cover. And he's on the banks of the River Scheldt during the siege of Antwerp, when the first self-detonating bomb ship blew up with devastating effect. So that's really, you know, the arc of the novel. So there's tension and adventure in the novel, but there's also a lot of fun. So I thought I'd put, you know, some slides together to give you a sense of some of the fun things that help me understand this. How to stomp on a narcissistic husband. Okay, so his first mission was in Scotland, where he served Mary, Queen of Scots, and Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie or the story, but it was a notoriously miserable marriage, and I had to try and feel my way into it. So over here we have on the left, well, it's over this side. This is a coin that was minted when they first got married, February 1565. And Mary was the anointed queen, so she had all of the legal rights. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was a king consort, which was of a lower legal capacity. Nevertheless, she issued the coin, and they said Henricus and Maria, and he's there, he's taller, his head is bigger, he's looking down. In real life, they were the same height. She's looking up. He liked that. Now, he soured on her very, very quickly, and within a few months, when she got pregnant, she withdrew all of these coins from circulation. This is what we had. Maria and Henricus. And we have the Scots coats of arms on one side, and on the other side is a thistle. There's no big Darnley face. So that was a public humiliation of great art, I think. I don't know who else can really insult somebody publicly that effectively. But anyway, that was the way I got myself into the marriage of Darnley and Mary, Queen of Scots. My main character is involved with both. Okay, so there are several battle scenes in the novel. This battle here, my character Latham was very involved in bringing some intelligence to the Spanish army was besieging Mons in the Spanish Netherlands during the Dutch Rebellion. And there's a place called Saint Ghislain, and Quivrane was French territory, and a French Huguenot force sort of invaded and was hoping to relieve the siege of Mons, but Latham got the word to the Spaniards and they ambushed it, and it was a total rout. So I'm going to just put a little audio excerpt which was recorded by an excellent actor by the name of Douglas Shapiro. Some of you may know him.
Oh, yes. Chapter 5, Ambush near Mons, 17th July, 1572. Edward Latham, spy for the Catholic side, is fighting with Spain against a French Huguenot force. Don Cristobal ordered his gunmen to load small shot in the arquebus and balls in their pistols. He led the first square, Alvarado, with their colors, the second, a pikeman, the reserve. Squares, Don Cristobal yelled, crouch until their first round of fire, then pike, hack arms and necks. Gunmen, shoot chests and faces. Square one, attack! The first square pushed onto the road. Body by body, they forced themselves through Genlis's protectors, disappearing into a mass of enemy fighters. Waiting, Latham was vaguely aware of Spanish horns back up the road, ordering a general charge into the remaining French forces. Alvarado led his square onto the road. Then, the reserve square crossed the ditch. Latham was suffused with fear. Somehow, he'd been shuffled into the front line. His knees knocked, his teeth chattered, his hands shook on the pike staff, which wobbled. This was fighting more exposed, yet more hemmed in than anything he'd known. Don't hit me, snarled the man next to him as they inched forward. Latham lost awareness of his body. His skin felt as if it was dissolving into diffuse sparklets. He didn't know if he even had a skin. He floated forward because the man behind him pushed. He saw his soul looking down from the ether, pitying the fragile frame that tottered into the chaos of clashing swords and gun smoke, coldly reckoning the credits and debits of its brief life. A feral scream issued from his mouth when his mind finally named the gun pointing at his head as French, the glare of the hating eyes of a killer. His paralysis unlocked. He felt the spirit of Mars lift his pike.
So a couple of people have commented, people I don't know, on that I've done a lot of work on the military things, and what did it feel, how did I feel my way into what it felt like to be in Latham's position, and I can tell you that's how I felt walking out onto the concert platform sometimes when I was giving concerts. So, you know, I had deep, you know, interpersonal experience with that kind of fear. Innovation, there's a few slides that are going to be around innovation of the period, and in general, innovation is like a character in the novel, which kind of unifies things. It's this lumbering oaf that like swings here and swings there and affects everybody, whether you're somebody who's got a split core like Latham, or a king or a queen who's trying to manage a situation, or a general who's fighting a war like that Don Cristobal. You had to be aware of change and social upheaval. So here, this is a 13th century drawing of what a telescope might look like, and it was by Roger Bacon. And over here is Galileo's, one of Galileo's telescopes at about 1610. So the first patent was contested for a telescope in the late 1590s. So it wasn't unreasonable for me to assume that there were earlier experiments, and Don Cristobal, the Spanish soldier from the previous scene, who becomes a kind of sworn oath brother to Latham while he's on the Catholic side, that he would have one of these, which he'd actually confiscated from a Dutch apothecary. And the telescope, it's a bad telescope, it just does middle distance, but the implications of what it can do were kind of clear to everybody. So that's one innovation. Now this was one of my favorite innovations. This is the Monteviso Tunnel, and it was the first tunnel right through the Alps, and it was begun in 1418 and finished in 1490. The King of France and the Marquis of Saluzzo had this agreement, and they both started tunneling from the opposite ends and didn't quite meet in the middle, but they fixed it up when they realized they'd made a mistake. This is the entrance to the tunnel today. You can't really go through it, but Latham and Don Cristobal, they take a party of guerrilla fighters through the tunnel on an unauthorized fighting mission, and fun horror stuff happens on the mountain. But I couldn't resist this because the reason that the French king and the Italian marquis wanted to go through all of this was to avoid paying taxes to the Duke of Tuscany. So I'm thinking, oh, I'm a former financial advisor, you know, we do trusts, generation skipping trusts, and survivor standby life insurance trust. That was the last thing I heard when I walked out the door. That was the latest invention. So we do those things, these guys did this. So, and also I have a life partner who likes building and construction things, and she said, you've got to leave the tunnel in. Or, you know, we will separate. So the tunnel stayed in. All right, another innovation. At the Siege of Antwerp, the Dutch didn't do some of the basics well, so they didn't flood the dike in time when they could have. They never figured out a communication system, but they did a lot of so that if they managed to break the siege, that the other fleet that was coming in to support them never found out. So they didn't do some of the basics well, but they did invent a lot of things. This is called War's End. It's 4 times as big as anything else. It was designed as an artillery platform. This is in 1584, and they thought that they'd be able to float it with corks. It didn't work. The engineer who disapproved of this called it River's Bottom, which it was. Eventually, the Spaniards called it a bugaboo, and they managed to ground it on a sandbar. But still, to be able to even conceive and build such a thing was something that really messed with people's heads. And that's really the point of the innovation focus in the novel, which is that people were unsettled, and that's how I can identify today with then, was there was just a lot of change going on. This is something that did work. That guy who called it River's Bottom, Federico Giambelli, invented the first self-detonating ship bomb. And it had you didn't need a person on the boat to light all the flames and then jump off in the traditional fire ships. He had clocks that at a certain preset time sparked a flint. Flints were pretty new attached to clocks. And that fired a wick. And the wick led to 7,000 pounds of explosives that were designed to explode sideways, laterally, and not up. And this thing exploded with absolutely devastating effect, killed 1,000 people in like that. And it did actually blow a big breach in this Spanish constructed bridge across the river. But as I said, they didn't have a communication system, so the Dutch didn't know that the breach had been made, and the siege could have been ended until the Spaniards had done repairs. But still, that kind of thing really messed with their heads.
Today with Facebook.
And there is some sex and stuff in the novel. Now, this bloke over here, that's not my main character. That is Emperor Charles V, and he was the father of King Philip of Spain, whom Latham had been serving and was still on his payroll and was working for Elizabeth. The lady is Lady Barbara Blomberg, who was the greatest singer of her age. And they had an affair and produced an illegitimate son called Don John. Now the reason why that matters in the novel is that Mary Queen of Scots, who was imprisoned in an English castle, got the notion that if she could marry this Don John, he could get her out, and either by negotiation or by attack, and she'd be able to get back to Scotland. So anyway, she tracks Latham down, who'd served her many years ago, and basically guilts him into managing the suit with Lady Barbara to try and get her to persuade her son to marry Mary Queen of Scots. So anyway, Latham has set up the first meeting, and Mary said to him, take your lute, you're a good musician, and she's a good musician, and be charming, be obliging, use your handsome self. So obviously she's willing to pimp him. So anyway, this is his first meeting, and he gets to her rooms and realizes that she's rehearsing. This is me reading. Chapter 9, Hubris, Brussels, October 1576. Too soon, the motet ended. The eavesdroppers exchanged glances but didn't move. The door opened and 5 men trooped out, chatting eagerly, until they saw the listeners. Get out, knaves, or pay us. Done with spirituality, they pushed the eavesdroppers downstairs. Latham waited, then returned to the landing as a viol de gamba and cornet were tuning up. Secular songs began. A troubadour love song, a sarcastic ditty on a miserable marriage, a martial ballad of Spain routing Moors. The soprano duetted with fast instrumental lines. Latham had never heard the style before. She must have invented it. At one moment, her voice was liquid gold, pouring from high to low when following the cornet. A string of shimmering diamonds tossed into the air when imitating plucked spinet scales. Low with urgency when improvising with the viol de gamba. She made the instruments sound all wood, brass, and gut, compared with the vibrating resonance that was her body. Latham's blood tingled. His own body traveled very far places. But she'd pushed her accompanists too hard into this glorious cosmos. Foul notes from the spinet, a staggering inability to keep up, a jagged tail into silence. Turd fingers, muse murderer, dung sucker, get out of my sight, you're dismissed. Out, out, out. The voice down from the ether, violent guttural, pottery breaking, the clang and jangle of metal hitting a keyboard. The door banged open and a man backed out, clutching his bleeding forehead. A sheepish cornetist and gamba player followed him.
Latham ran upstairs and walked in. He came face to face with a middle-aged woman bent over, face flushed, her chest heaving with incandescent fury. Lady Barbara, I am enchanted, he cried, sweeping off his hat and bowing. Straightening up, he thought, I'm to conduct this suit with my most obliging manners. How do I begin?
So that's it.
Beautiful.